Well, I'm going to say something, and it's because I'm old. I remember watching the Popeye cartoons, and he would say, "I am that I am. I am what I am." And well, guess what? Paul says the same thing. Uh, I'm in First Corinthians chapter 15, and um, Paul is. If you don't know who the Apostle Paul is, Paul wrote the majority of the New Testament letters. You have the Pauline, what they call the epistles, which are letters to churches, and then his pastoral letters to individuals like Timothy, who is one of his spiritual sons. But Paul, who was Saul, um, is an interesting individual who started out persecuting the church, the Way, as it was known before they became Christians. They were called the Way, and he went out and he persecuted. He was there at the first martyr, Stephen, first Christian martyr. He was there holding or condoning agreeing to that, and went out and put many in prison, beat many, and just wasn't the nicest guy for Christians, right? He was one that you would not want to show up at your church, at your meeting place. And in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's talking to the church of Corinth and trying to correct some issues that they were having. But he starts talking, and he says this, verse 8, I'm going to go chapter 15, 1 Corinthians. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me, talking about Jesus Christ. And it's an odd statement, untimely born, right? And he goes on, he says, for I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. He said, I'm the least of them. I'm the worst of all these guys, right? Nobody's worse than I am. No one has done more than I've done. I'm so unworthy of everything. But this is what he says, verse 10. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. And as I was reading that, I really began to think about my own life personally, and all my failures, all the times I've made mistakes, all the times I've fallen short of his glory, all the times I've done the wrong things where I walked away from him, ran away from him in my early 20s, and yet to recognize that all of those sins, all of those things I did wrong, made me a bad person. But by the grace of God, I am that I am. And far too often, I think you and I, we punish ourselves for the sins of our past. We limit the grace of God. We limit the ability of God to do incredible things in us because of what we've done. And what Paul is telling us, I know who I am. I know I'm a persecutor of the church. I know I stood there when Stephen was martyred. I know I beat people. I know I put them into prison. I know I did everything against God. But by the grace of God, I am that I am. And I'm going to work all the harder, not to prove, listen to what he says, not to prove that I'm worthy of his grace, not to prove that I'm better now, but because of the grace of God, that's why I work. You see, there's a difference there, recognizing that that you and I are evil. Yes, we are evil. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? That Paul would say to the Romans, why does I do what I don't want to do, but that which I want to do, I don't do? Why? Because we're evil. We live in flesh. We have pride of life, the lust of the flesh, right? We have these things within us, and to recognize we can work as hard as we can, but we'll never accomplish anything. Everything must be accomplished through the grace of God. Now, Saul, who was Saul and then becomes Paul, becomes this incredible Christian, right? A great teacher, a great apostle. He says he's the least of the apostles, but one of the best apostles ever. Why? Because of the grace of God. So, hey, today, why don't you do this? Do what Paul says, forgetting what was in the past. This one thing I do, I look forward. I press on towards the goal for which Christ has called me into. Why don't you forget about the past, forget about what made you who you are from the sins, what you think that is, and recognize that you are who you are by the grace of God, and that each and every day from glory to glory that we're called to become more and more like him. So tomorrow I could say, by the grace of God, I